This is my true story. I was a single father who gave my whole life to raise one daughter. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, and sold my comfort to give her everything she ever wanted. When she got engaged, I felt proud. I thought she would walk down the aisle with gratitude in her eyes. But instead, she turned to me and said, "You're ruining my wedding." Her words hit harder than any wound I've ever known. That night, I decided to do something that would make everyone remember me forever. Before I tell you, tell me where you're watching from. And subscribe so my story can reach more people. I spent my whole life saving for her wedding. Every coin, every dream, every small joy I ever held back. I worked in a factory for 30 years, sometimes 14 hours a day, so she could study in good schools, wear good clothes, and live a life better than mine. Every time my back ached, I told myself it was worth it. Every time I skipped a meal, I told myself she would one day thank me. When she got engaged, I was the happiest man alive. I paid for everything: the hall, the food, the decorations, the musicians, even the dress she would wear. I wanted her wedding to be beautiful, something people would talk about for years. But that day, the day before the ceremony, she looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. Her voice was sharp, her tone filled with anger. She said I was ruining her wedding. Everyone went silent. The laughter stopped. The sound of her words echoed in my ears again and again. I stood there frozen. She was surrounded by her fiancé's family, people wearing expensive clothes and fake smiles. I could see they looked down on me. My plain shirt, my old shoes, my rough hands that told stories of labor and love. But she didn't defend me. She joined them. She said I was embarrassing her, that I didn't belong there, that I should stay away from the ceremony because people like me would ruin her image. Those words burned through me like fire. I didn't speak. My throat closed. My hands trembled. I wanted to remind her who built the life she was marrying from, who carried her when she was sick, who saved coins so she could buy her first school bag. But I stayed silent. I didn't want to fight on the eve of her wedding. I thought maybe she was stressed. Maybe she didn't mean it. So I quietly picked up my coat and walked out of the hall. No one stopped me, not even her. I walked down the street under the night sky, feeling the weight of every year I spent working for her happiness. Every step felt heavier than the last. When I reached home, I sat on the porch for hours. I could still hear the music playing from the rehearsal. It was coming from the same house I paid for, the same home where she took her first steps, where she called me Dad with her tiny voice, where she once said she would never leave me. I sat there thinking about how life changes. One day, you are a hero in your child's eyes. The next, you are just a problem to be hidden. I looked at my calloused hands and thought of the nights I came home exhausted, but still made her dinner because she loved my cooking. I remembered her laughter as a child, how she would run around the kitchen while I fixed her toys. And now she was ashamed of me. That thought hurt more than any physical pain. I wanted to cry, but my tears were dry. Years of silent endurance had turned them into stone. I stared into the dark and realized something important. Love should not be begged for. Respect should not be demanded. It should come naturally. And when it doesn't, silence is more powerful than anger. I realized I had given her everything, but by doing so, I had made her forget the value of effort. I had protected her so much that she thought comfort was her right, not a gift. That realization changed everything inside me. I stopped thinking like a father that night. I started thinking like a man who finally saw the truth. My daughter didn't just insult me, she erased me. And if she wanted a wedding without me, she was about to get exactly that, in a way she would never forget. That night, as the lights from the hall faded and the cold air filled my lungs, I decided something quietly but firmly. I was done being the man who stayed silent. I was going to remind her, and everyone else, who I truly was. She said I made her look poor. She said I didn't belong near her new family. Her voice carried through the room like a knife, cutting through every bit of pride I had left. Her fiancé's parents stood there, nodding, pretending to be polite while their eyes said everything, that I was a burden, an embarrassment, a man who didn't belong among people like them. I stood there in my plain clothes, holding the folder that had every receipt I'd kept, proof of every payment I made for that wedding. The hall, the catering, the flowers, even the ring deposit. All from my savings, all from years of hard work. But she didn't care. She didn't even glance at me. She said I was ruining her image, that my presence made her look cheap. I tried to smile, to remind her that it was me who built that home, who worked those nights so she could wear silk while I wore sweat. But the words wouldn't come out. My voice broke before it could even leave my mouth. Her fiancé laughed under his breath, trying to hide it. His mother turned away, pretending not to hear, but her smirk gave her away. The humiliation wasn't quiet. It was staged, like a show, and I was the fool they were laughing at. I wanted to leave, but my legs refused to move. My heart pounded in my chest, louder than the music in the background. I stared at the chandelier above, the one I bought years ago when my daughter said she wanted our house to look elegant. Back then, she was sweet, grateful. She used to hug me for the smallest things. Now, she couldn't even look at me without disgust. I remembered the nights when she was little, how she used to sleep on my shoulder when she was scared of thunder, how she cried when she scraped her knee and I carried her inside, whispering that everything would be fine. I remembered the day she graduated and told me she wanted to make me proud. I thought I already was proud. But maybe I was wrong. Now she stood before me, surrounded by people who judged everything I was, my job, my clothes, my silence. She said I didn't fit in. Those words stayed with me. Fit in, as if love was a costume, as if fatherhood needed an invitation. I wanted to tell her that the money I used to raise her came from hands blistered by labor, from years of sacrifice, from nights when I went hungry so she could eat. But what would be the point? She wouldn't hear me, not anymore. So I stayed silent. I let her words echo in the air and burn into my chest. I lowered my head, nodded once, and walked out the door. The laughter followed me. Outside, the night air hit my face. I stood by the gate, listening to the music from inside. My hands were shaking. My heart felt heavy, not with anger, but with disappointment so deep it almost felt peaceful. I realized she wasn't the same person anymore. The girl I raised was gone. In her place stood someone who valued luxury over love, image over integrity, and pride over people. And as I stood under the streetlight, something inside me hardened. It wasn't revenge yet. It was realization, cold and clear. The people inside thought they had humiliated me. They didn't know they were standing on ground that still belonged to me. They didn't know the roof over their heads, the walls around their laughter, were mine. That night, I stopped being ashamed. I stopped feeling small. I turned, looked at the glowing windows, and whispered to myself, "They can have their pride. I'll take back everything else." That night, I sat alone on the front steps of the house I built with my bare hands. The same house where she learned to walk, where her laughter once filled every room. Now it was filled with strangers, loud music, and shallow smiles. I could hear the faint sound of celebration coming from inside, clinking glasses, laughter, and her voice calling out instructions like the queen of a palace that wasn't hers. Each sound was a reminder that I didn't belong there anymore. I looked around the yard. The old swing I made for her still hung from the tree, slightly rusted but standing strong. I remembered pushing her on it when she was a child, her small hands gripping the ropes, her laughter rising higher than the sky. Back then, she used to say, "Don't let go, Dad." But tonight, she had let go completely. The cold breeze brushed against my face, carrying the smell of food I paid for but wasn't invited to eat. I could see the glow of lights from the windows, golden, warm, beautiful. Inside that light, my daughter lived like a stranger to me. Outside, I sat in the dark, forgotten, like a shadow that no one wanted to notice. For the first time in years, the house felt empty, even though it was full of people. The walls that once held love now echoed with noise. I ran my fingers along the cracked paint on the porch railing and thought about every repair I made, every nail I hammered, every brick I carried. All for her future, all for her comfort. And now she called it her house, as if I had never existed. A dog barked in the distance. The night was silent again. I leaned back against the wall, staring at the stars. My eyes felt heavy, but not from tiredness, from the weight of years spent giving without ever being seen. It's strange how a man can give everything, yet end up with nothing but quiet. I thought about calling her mother, but she had passed away long ago. She used to say, "One day she'll understand your heart." I used to believe that. But now I wasn't sure she ever would. Some people only learn after they lose what they took for granted. The laughter inside grew louder. I could hear her thanking her fiancé's parents, calling them Mom and Dad. That broke me in a way I can't describe. I didn't cry, though. I just sat there with my hands clasped, staring at the ground, feeling something inside me slowly die. Not love, but attachment. It was in that silence that I made my decision. I wasn't going to beg to be part of her world anymore. I wasn't going to stand in the background like a ghost while she pretended I didn't exist. Number. I was going to remind her where she came from. I stood up, walked inside my small room, and turned on the dim lamp on my desk. Papers were scattered everywhere, bills, old receipts, and one folder marked with my name. I opened it slowly. Inside were the title deeds, tax documents, everything that proved one simple truth. This house was mine, every inch of it. The realization hit me like a quiet storm. She might have thrown me out of the wedding, but she had done it inside my own home. The irony made me smile for the first time that night. I had been silent too long, but silence has power when it ends at the right time. I closed the folder, placed it neatly on the table, and leaned back in my chair. The music still played. The laughter continued, but my heart was calm. The plan was already forming in my head, clear and sharp. I wasn't going to shout or argue. I didn't need to. I had something stronger, control. The night grew colder, but I didn't feel it. I had something warmer than comfort now. Purpose. The kind that comes when a man finally stands up for his own worth. Tomorrow would not be her day. It would be mine. The next morning, the house was quiet. The celebration had drained everyone. Empty glasses, ribbons, and broken flower petals lay across the floor. The air smelled like perfume and dust. I walked slowly toward my room, the only space that still felt mine. I opened the wooden drawer by my bed, the one she never bothered to look inside. Inside was a single brown folder. It had been there for years, untouched, waiting for a reason to exist again. I pulled it out carefully and placed it on the table. The paper inside was yellowed at the edges, but the words on it were still clear. My name, printed in bold, right next to the words, property owner. The house, the land, every wall and tile under this roof, it was all mine. I stared at that paper for a long time. My hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from realization. She had forgotten who gave her this life. She thought because I paid for everything, it meant I had nothing left. But she never asked who the real owner was. She never checked. She assumed. That assumption would be her biggest mistake. For years, I kept that deed safe. I told myself I'd transfer it to her one day, maybe after her wedding, when she proved she could respect what I built. But now, looking at how she treated me, I knew she didn't deserve it. Love without respect is just noise. And I was done listening to noise. I sat there thinking about the day I first bought this house. I was 38, working long nights at the factory. I used to sleep only 4 hours a night. I skipped breakfast just to save a few extra rupees each week. I built this home brick by brick, hoping it would be a place of love for generations. I never thought the person I built it for would turn it into a stage for my humiliation. I ran my fingers across the signature line. My own name felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else, someone stronger, someone who still had control. Then I realized that man was still me. I just needed to remember it. I reached for my old reading glasses, put them on, and checked every line. Everything was in order. No one had the right to take it from me. Not her, not anyone. The law was on my side, even if life hadn't been. For a moment, I thought about what it would mean to let her stay. Maybe she would come around. Maybe she'd apologize after the wedding. But then I remembered the look in her eyes when she told me to stay away. The disgust, The shame. That was not a daughter who would come back and say sorry. That was someone who had erased me from her story. So I made my choice. I stood up, folded the deed neatly, and placed it in my coat pocket. I walked out into the yard, where the morning sun was just breaking through the clouds. The grass was still wet with dew. It reminded me of simpler times, days when she used to run barefoot across it, laughing. That memory hurt now, but it also gave me strength. I knew what had to be done. I wasn't going to argue or confront her. I wasn't going to shout or cry. I had no reason to. Everything I needed was already in my hands. I went back inside, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat near the window. I could see her through the glass, walking outside with her fiancé, showing off the decorations, acting like the queen of a world she didn't own. My lips curled into a tired smile. She had no idea what was coming. As I sipped my tea, I whispered quietly to myself, she wanted a wedding without me. Let her have it, but not in my house. That thought gave me peace. I opened my phone and scrolled through my contacts. My lawyer's number was still saved from years ago, back when I almost sold this place. I stared at it for a few seconds, then tapped call. Tomorrow would change everything. I stared at my phone for a long moment before pressing the call button. My lawyer, Mr. David, answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, the same voice that helped me when I bought this house decades ago. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but he remembered me instantly. I could almost hear the surprise in his tone when I said, I need to sell my house. He paused, then asked if everything was all right. I told him I was fine. I just wanted it done immediately. No hesitation, no delay. He started to explain that the process might take time, but I cut him off gently. There's a buyer, I said. Find one today. Any fair offer will do. He hesitated again, then asked, even though it's your daughter's wedding tomorrow? I looked out the window at the white tents and flower arches she had set up on my lawn and replied quietly, especially because of that. There was a long silence on the line. Then he said, I'll handle it. When the call ended, I set the phone down and leaned back in my chair. The room felt heavy, but my heart felt light. I had made my decision. I wasn't acting out of anger. I was acting out of clarity. For years, I lived as if I owed her the world. That morning, I finally realized the world was already mine. I spent the next few hours packing small things, my old watch, some clothes, my wife's photo, a few letters she wrote before she passed away. I placed them all in one suitcase. I didn't need much. The rest didn't matter anymore. From the window, I could see them rehearsing again. Her fiancé's family had arrived early. Cars filled the driveway. Laughter, music, chatter, all happening on land they believed was theirs. I watched silently, sipping my tea as they hung more ribbons, adjusted the lights, and argued about where to place the cake table. They were busy building a celebration on top of my signature. It felt strange at first, watching them enjoy something that wasn't theirs. But then it felt satisfying, because they didn't know they were already standing on borrowed ground. And borrowed things don't last. By noon, Mr. David called back. He had found a buyer, a quiet, middle-aged businessman who didn't want to negotiate. He was ready to sign immediately. I told him to proceed. We scheduled the signing for that evening, just before sunset. Perfect timing. When I hung up, I took one last slow walk through the house. My footsteps echoed softly across the floor. Every wall carried a memory. My daughter's old bedroom door was still covered in stickers and scribbles from her teenage years. My late wife's favorite painting still hung crooked in the hallway. I touched it gently and whispered, "It's time." Downstairs, the sound of laughter grew louder. I could hear my daughter ordering the decorators around, telling them to make everything perfect. I smiled sadly. She had no idea that perfection was about to fall apart. I sat quietly on the back porch, watching the sunset. The sky turned gold, then red. The same colors I saw the day she was born. Back then, I thought her arrival was the most beautiful thing I'd ever witnessed. Now, watching that same sky, I realized beauty doesn't last if there's no gratitude behind it. When Mr. David arrived with the papers, I signed them without hesitation. His eyes studied me, searching for regret. But I had none. I was calm. The buyer signed next. Just like that, it was done. The house, the property, everything. No longer mine. As he left, Mr. David turned and asked softly, "What will you tell her?" I smiled and said, "Nothing. She'll find out tomorrow." When the door closed behind him, I sat alone in the dark, the music from the wedding rehearsal still echoing faintly outside. I picked up my wife's photo one more time and said quietly, "She wanted a stage. Let her see what happens when the curtain falls." That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in years. The morning of the wedding arrived with bright sunlight and noise everywhere. Cars lined the street, vendors rushed in and out, photographers carried their cameras, and guests dressed in their best clothes. From the outside, it looked like a celebration of love, but I knew what it really was, a performance built on a foundation that no longer belonged to them. I woke up early, long before the noise started. The air was calm, the sky still pale with dawn light. I packed my small suitcase and folded my old shirt neatly over the top. The papers, the signed sale documents, rested inside my coat pocket, ready to end one story and begin another. From the window, I could see her standing in the garden, surrounded by her friends and family, smiling, posing for pictures. She looked happy, radiant even. For a moment, I almost felt proud again. Almost. Then I remembered the night before, her words, her tone, the way she said I was ruining her wedding. That memory hardened my heart. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the final decorations being set up. The arch, the flowers, the tables, all under a roof that was no longer hers. It felt poetic. Quiet justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to arrive at the right time. By 9 a.m., the new owner arrived with Mr. David. They were calm, professional, polite. We didn't discuss much. I simply handed them the spare keys and said, "It's all yours now." The new owner nodded, thanked me, and asked one simple question. "When should I come?" I smiled faintly and said, "Right before the vows." Mr. David gave me a knowing look. He didn't ask why. He understood. I left the house soon after. I didn't want to be there when everything unfolded. I walked down the road, away from the music, away from the people who had turned me into a stranger. My suitcase rolled softly behind me. I didn't look back. Not once. As I reached the main road, I could still hear faint echoes of celebration. The band tuning their instruments, people laughing, glasses clinking. My daughter's voice echoed through a microphone, greeting her guests. She probably believed I stayed away out of shame, but it wasn't shame, it was closure. At a small cafe nearby, I sat in the corner, ordered another cup of tea, and waited. The wedding was supposed to start at 11 a.m. The papers were already registered. The ownership had legally shifted hours ago. The moment she said "I do," she'd be saying it in someone else's home. The thought didn't bring me joy, not the kind that laughs. It brought me peace, a quiet, heavy kind of peace, the kind a man feels when he stops begging for respect. I imagined her walking down the aisle, her expensive dress trailing behind her, her face glowing with pride, the guests cheering, the cameras flashing. And then, the moment everything stopped, when two men would walk in, hand her the legal notice, and tell her the truth. I pictured her confusion turning into panic, the whispers spreading, her fiancé's family stepping back, realizing the grand home they admired wasn't hers to offer. She had said I was ruining her wedding. In a way, she was right, but not out of spite. Out of justice. Out of memory. Out of a father's right to teach one final lesson. As the clock struck noon, I finished my tea and stood up. I didn't need to witness it. Some things are better unseen. The satisfaction comes not from watching the fall, but from knowing you had the strength to walk away before it happened. Outside, the sunlight grew warmer, reflecting off car mirrors and wedding ribbons fluttering in the breeze. Somewhere behind me, the music would stop soon, the silence would follow. And when it did, she would understand what I meant when I said love without respect doesn't last. I walked toward the bus station, carrying nothing but a suitcase and a calm heart. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel forgotten. I felt free. The ceremony began just as the clock struck 11. The garden was filled with music, laughter, and the smell of fresh flowers. Guests took their seats under the big white tent while photographers moved around, capturing every smile and sparkle. My daughter stood at the top of the staircase, dressed in her dream gown, glowing with pride. She looked like everything she ever wanted to be, adored, admired, envied. But she didn't know that in less than an hour, everything would collapse. The vows were about to begin when two men arrived at the front gate. They weren't dressed like guests. They wore suits, carried briefcases, and moved with quiet confidence. The security guard tried to stop them, but one of them handed him a paper with an official stamp. The guard read it, hesitated, then stepped aside. The men walked through the crowd, calm and serious, ignoring the music, ignoring the confused looks that followed them. The wedding planner noticed them first. She frowned, walked over, and asked what was happening. One of the men handed her a letter, the same letter Mr. David had signed less than 24 hours ago. It was short, clear, and undeniable. The property was no longer owned by my daughter or anyone in her family. Effective immediately, the premises had been sold. The music stopped mid-note. The planner's face turned pale as she read the notice twice, then 3 times, trying to understand. The microphone squealed as it picked up whispers and confusion. My daughter looked up from the aisle, frowning, as her fiancé leaned closer, asking what was wrong. The planner hesitated, then walked up to her quietly. She leaned in and whispered something. My daughter's smile faded instantly. The color drained from her face. Her hands, clutching the bouquet, began to tremble. She turned to the guests and said something softly, but no one could hear her. Then the planner raised her voice, struggling to stay calm, and said, "I'm sorry, but this property isn't yours anymore." A wave of gasps moved through the crowd. The groom's parents looked at each other in disbelief. The photographers froze, unsure whether to keep recording. The music stopped completely. Someone from the back shouted, "What's going on?" My daughter's eyes darted around, searching for me. She looked furious, then frightened, then lost. She whispered to her fiancé, trying to explain, but he stepped back. His family began murmuring to each other. His mother asked loudly, "What does that mean? How can this house not belong to you?" The silence that followed was heavier than any music could have been. Guests began standing, whispering, pointing. Some tried to leave quietly, but there was no quiet left. Just confusion and embarrassment. The 2 men handed a copy of the sale documents to the groom's father. He read the papers, his face tightening with each line. Finally, he looked at my daughter and said, "You told us this was yours." His voice was cold, sharp, the kind that ends trust in a single breath. Tears filled her eyes. She tried to speak, but her words stumbled out. The groom's family turned away, walking toward their car without another word. The guests followed, one by one, pretending not to look at her. Within minutes, the laughter, the music, the celebration, all of it, vanished. The only sound left was her sobbing echoing through the garden. I wasn't there to see it, but Mr. David later told me what happened. He said she stood in the middle of the ruined wedding, still in her gown, her makeup streaked with tears, holding the bouquet that suddenly meant nothing. The lights, the flowers, the tables, everything she had shown off, stood useless in a place she no longer owned. That was the moment everything changed. Pride fell silent. Ego turned to dust. For the first time, she understood what it meant to lose something she took for granted. And somewhere miles away, I sat quietly by the bus window, watching the fields pass by. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just whispered to myself, "Now she'll remember what respect costs." The fall didn't happen all at once. It came in pieces, slow, painful, and loud. The first blow landed when her fiancé's family walked away. They didn't shout, they didn't argue. They simply turned and left. That silence hurt her more than anger ever could. Her fiancé didn't even look back. He removed the ring from his finger, placed it on the nearest table, and followed his parents to the car. The sound of the car doors slamming shut echoed through the empty yard like thunder. Guests whispered behind their hands as they left too. The same people who had once praised her for her beauty and grace now couldn't meet her eyes. Every whisper was a judgment, every sideways glance a reminder that pride always ends in loneliness. The wedding that was supposed to make her look perfect became the day everyone would talk about for the wrong reasons. The decorations hung limp in the wind, the flowers began to wilt under the afternoon sun, the music never started again. Workers quietly packed up chairs while her makeup streaked down her cheeks. She stood there, frozen, surrounded by everything she wanted, but nothing she could keep. When the lawyer's car pulled away, she ran inside the house, desperate to call me. My phone stayed silent in my pocket. I was already miles away, sitting in a small motel room with my suitcase beside me. I didn't turn the TV on. I didn't want to see the news, though I knew people were already posting pictures. Her first call came an hour later. I didn't answer. The second one followed, then a third, then 10 more. I sat there watching my phone light up again and again, her name flashing across the screen. The same name that used to bring me joy now only reminded me of betrayal. Eventually the calls stopped. Then came the messages, long, desperate ones filled with apologies and explanations. She said she didn't mean it, that she was stressed, that it wasn't her fault. She begged me to come back, to fix everything. But some things can't be fixed. Respect, once broken, doesn't rebuild with words. It rebuilds with time. And she hadn't earned that yet. By evening, she was alone. The guests gone, the food untouched, the music silent. Her wedding dress dragged through the dirt as she sat on the steps of a house she no longer owned. The same steps where I had sat the night before, alone and unwanted. Only now she felt what I had felt, the emptiness of being invisible in a place you thought was yours. I imagined her sitting there as the sun went down, staring at the locked doors, realizing the lights would go off soon and she wouldn't have the key anymore. Maybe then she finally understood what I tried to teach her all her life. Pride without gratitude turns love into dust. Back at my motel, I finally stood up, opened the window, and looked out at the fading sky. The air smelled of rain. I took a deep breath and let it fill my chest. It felt clean, lighter than any air I had breathed in years. I wasn't happy, but I wasn't broken either. What I did wasn't revenge. It was truth, a quiet truth she had to face alone. Later that night, a final message came from her. "Dad, please talk to me." I understand now I stared at it for a long time before setting my phone down. I didn't reply. Some lessons need silence to settle in. The next morning, I packed my things and checked out of the motel. As I handed over the keys, the manager asked where I was heading. I smiled faintly and said, "Anywhere peaceful." Behind me, my daughter's wedding decorations were probably being torn down, her dress folded away, her pride buried under embarrassment. She wanted a day to remember forever. She got one, just not the way she imagined. 3 days passed before the dust finally settled. The wedding was officially canceled. The groom's family refused all calls and blocked her number. The news spread quietly through the town. The rich girl who lost everything overnight. Neighbors whispered, co-workers gossiped, and her friends disappeared one by one. Pride has a way of emptying a room faster than shame ever could. She went back to the house, only to find the gates locked. The new owner's name was already on the board outside. Her decorations were gone. The lights were off. She stood there for a long time, clutching her phone, staring at the empty building that used to be her home. The home I built. The home she threw me out of. She tried calling me again that evening, and again I didn't answer. I wasn't ignoring her out of anger. I was giving her silence, the same silence she gave me when she said I didn't belong. Sometimes silence teaches more than words ever can. That night, I sat by the small motel window again, watching the rain pour down. The streets were empty, the world quiet. I thought about her growing up, her first steps, her school performances, the birthday parties where she'd hug me tightly and say I was the best father in the world. I thought about how proud I was when she got her first job, when she told me she wanted to make me proud. Somewhere along the way, that girl had been replaced by someone else. Someone who thought love was something you showed only when people were watching. I realized then that parents often love too much, so much that they forget to let their children fall. I had shielded her from every hardship, paid every bill, fixed every mistake, and because of that, she never learned what loss felt like until it came crashing down all at once. I didn't take joy in what happened. Watching your own child break, even if they caused it, doesn't bring peace. It just brings stillness. But that stillness had truth inside it. She needed to lose something she thought she owned to understand what truly mattered. The next morning, I received a letter from Mr. David. Inside was a check, the payment for the sale of the house. I didn't even look at the amount. I folded it neatly and slipped it into my pocket. The money didn't matter. What mattered was the meaning behind it. I had taken back control of something that was always mine. Later that week, I got another message from her. It was short, just 5 words. "I'm sorry. Please forgive me." I read it 3 times and then put the phone away. I didn't reply, not yet. Some lessons need time to sink deep. Forgiveness is a door that only opens once a person truly understands what they did, not when they're desperate to undo it. I walked out of the motel and stood under the morning sun. The world felt cleaner. The sky looked wide and blue, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel small beneath it. I wasn't just a father who gave. I was a man who remembered his worth. People often say revenge is about destruction, but this wasn't revenge. This was restoration. I didn't destroy her life. I just handed her back the reality she'd forgotten. The same reality that built every comfort she had. I thought about sending her one final message, not out of anger, but truth. Just one line to remind her where everything began and ended. But I didn't, because she already knew. Deep down, she would never forget the look on the lawyer's face when those papers were read aloud. That was her lesson, one she would carry longer than any apology could fix. As I walked down the road that morning, suitcase in hand, I felt light. The world was quiet again. No music, no noise, no shame, just peace. I didn't know where I'd go next, but I knew one thing for sure. I had given her the greatest wedding gift a father could, the truth. 3 weeks later, I sat on a park bench far from that old house, far from the noise, the memories, and the pain. The trees swayed softly, children played in the distance, and the sound of birds filled the air. It was quiet, peaceful, the kind of peace that doesn't come from winning, but from letting go. I had carried years of love, years of sacrifice, years of disappointment on my shoulders, and for the first time, they finally felt light. I thought about her again, my daughter. I didn't hate her. I never could. A father's heart doesn't stop caring. It just learns when to stop bleeding. I knew she was still trying to reach me. My lawyer told me she had come to his office asking for my address. I didn't leave one. Not because I wanted to hide, but because I wanted her to live with silence for a while, to understand that love is not guaranteed and respect cannot be forced. I imagined her standing in that empty house, realizing it wasn't the walls she lost. It was her father's trust. That was the real loss. And maybe one day, when she sits in her own quiet moment, she'll remember the man who once gave her everything and asked for nothing in return. I often replayed that day in my mind. The laughter, the arrogance, the fall, the silence that followed. It wasn't revenge I found in the end. It was justice shaped by years of being overlooked. I didn't ruin her wedding. I simply gave her the mirror she refused to look into. As the sun began to set, I looked down at my hands, old, rough, scarred from decades of work. These hands built her world. These hands put food on the table, paid every bill, carried her when she was sick, wiped her tears when she fell. And these same hands had signed the papers that took it all back. Life has a strange way of giving power back to those who stop begging for it. I took out my wallet and found an old photograph tucked behind the worn leather. It was her, 5 years old, smiling, covered in chocolate from a cake I baked for her birthday. Her small hand was holding mine, her eyes full of love. I smiled faintly. That was the daughter I raised, the one who used to run into my arms after school, the one who believed home was not a house, but a heartbeat. People change, Love changes, but truth doesn't. I didn't destroy her life. I reset it. I reminded her that pride built on someone else's sacrifice will always collapse. And maybe one day, when she rebuilds from scratch, she'll do it with humility. I finished my tea, stood up slowly, and looked at the horizon. The sky was golden, fading into shades of red, just like the night I left that house. Some endings aren't made of anger. Some are made of quiet understanding that you've done all you could. Before I left the park, I whispered softly. She told me I was ruining her wedding. But she forgot. I built the ground she stood on. Then I walked away. No music, no crowd, no noise. Just a man, finally free from the weight of a thankless love. And that's the truth of my story. She mocked me in my own home, so I made sure she'd never step foot in it again.